put those ones there. Sit, Dolly, on Mummy's knee. And Alice.
Bonds between parents and their children can be very strong. This mother and her child are clearly very close. So how did it feel the first time she left her baby?
It was awful. I was convinced that she was inconsolably crying and that she would feel abandoned, and I'd only gone off to do some photocopying, but, you know, I was crying nearly, and I was later back than I said I'd be by 10 minutes, and you know, I was hysteric. You know, I didn't imagine that I'd respond at all like that, but there you go.
What about Alice's response?
She was fine. She was fine. She didn't respond in any of the ways that I'd imagined. So I actually had to learn to trust her a bit more, that she's actually okay. I don't physically need to be there all the time for her to survive. She's not going to die without me. I mean, that I know now. But certainly the first few months I wasn't sure.
We can't divorce life inside the family from broader social and economic trends. Concern for the bonds that make up family life is high on the agenda for many politicians. Is one strong bond the answer? If children are cared for by grandparents, childminders or nurseries, is their development compromised? And does the quality of care matter? These are not new questions. In fact, scientific interest in them developed during the Second World War. People's lives had been disrupted in many ways. Large numbers of women had joined the labour force, replacing the men who had been enlisted to fight. When the war was over, the men reclaimed their jobs, and for women the roles of homemaker, childbearer and nurturer now came to the fore. There was more attention to the needs of children, not just their physical welfare, but also their psychological health. One illustration of these developing sensitivities was a growing concern for the welfare of young children in hospital. At the time, parents were discouraged from visiting their children, and as even minor surgery meant a lengthy stay in hospital, children were often separated from their parents for long periods. In 1952, a social worker, James Robertson, filmed 2-year-old Laura at frequent intervals during the fortnight she spent in hospital. This was made into a film that attracted a great deal of attention. The silent footage had a dramatic impact. It was striking and harrowing. The film demonstrated powerfully the distress felt by Laura without her mother, and as a direct result, hospital policies were gradually changed to allow parents greater access to their children. The film's director was based at the Tavistock Clinic in London, a world-famous centre for the study of mental health. A leading figure at the Tavistock was John Bowlby, and the film of Laura was just one sign of the challenging and far-reaching new thinking about child psychology that was developing at this time. Bowlby's first major study had been on juvenile thieves.
What I noticed was that there were children who had been referred for persistent thieving, truancy, and what I spotted was that they had had very, very disrupted childhoods. A continuous relationship, a mother and child in which both find happiness and satisfaction, promotes mental health.
In 1950, the World Health Organization asked John Bowlby to review the research evidence worldwide on the mental health of homeless children. His findings emphasized the long-term importance of the early relationship between mother and child.
About 60% of mothers do a very good job. So the majority of women have a good model to follow. And there's an awful lot to be said for that.
Wait, so you're saying that 40% of mothers don't do a good job?
I am.
And what does that mean?
Well, it means a lot of mental ill health and disturbance and delinquency and what have you.
Rudolf Schaefer at the University of Strathclyde is a leading authority on child psychology. He started his career in the 1950s, working alongside Bowlby at the Tavistock Clinic.
It was an extraordinarily exciting time because Bowlby had just published his work on the effects of maternal deprivation, and now was moving on to asking questions about how that tie with the mother is established and how it evolves over the early months and years of life. Bowlby's ideas were received with great hostility by his professional colleagues, especially fellow psychoanalysts. Bowlby, after all, was a psychoanalyst who worked at the Tavistock Clinic in London, and he thought he remained a psychoanalyst for the rest of his life. But in those days, psychoanalysis was really rather like a religious sect. You had to toe the line, and Bowlby didn't toe the line.
Bowlby became interested in the work of ethologist Konrad Lorenz. The imprinting response of ducklings and goslings is an inbuilt tendency to be close to a mother figure. They become attached during a brief sensitive period, and Lorenz showed that they could form a bond with any kind of mother figure. Bowlby applied some of these observations to the bonds between human adults and their young. Could there be similar pre-programmed patterns of behavior in young children? Bowlby believed that there were. He defined attachment behavior as behavior that makes a person stay closer to some other clearly identified individual, very often, but not always, the mother. He thought that the first few months of life were very important in establishing these attachment relationships. A child who has a strong positive attachment has a secure base from which to explore the world around and to try out other relationships too.
Bye-bye, darling. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. See you later.
But attachment theory, as it has come to be known, raises many questions. What kinds of attachment are there? How can we identify them? Do these different kinds of attachment affect later childhood or even adult life? If they go wrong, can they be put right? And what about the different patterns of care children experience at home and in nurseries? The old town of Leiden in Holland. Here today, as in other centres around the world, attachment issues are being studied. There is a unique piece of work developing as psychologists extend Bowlby's theory by looking more closely at the mother's behaviour. Marinus van Eisendoorn researches and lectures at the University of Leiden. He's very conscious of the tradition within which he is working.
The major influence is the work of John Bowlby, the British child psychiatrist, who wrote this magnificent 3-volume book on attachment. Those books were quite clinically oriented, and I tried to derive some questions and issues more in the domain of normal child rearing, normal family life.
Van Eisendoorn is professor at the Centre for Child and Family Studies. Studying attachment is not straightforward. One way is to observe the children in the home setting, relating to mother, father, or other children. But can the essential elements of home life be translated into a standard laboratory setting for controlled scientific study? After conducting extensive observations of parents and children at home, a student of Bowlby's, Mary Ainsworth, devised such a procedure called the strange situation, which places the child under some stress. It has become the most widely used, standardized way to assess the quality of a child's attachment to their caregiver. Here the researchers are recording how 14-month-old Lisa responds in this attractive but unfamiliar setting. How will she react to a stranger? What will happen when her mother leaves the room? And when she returns? It's Lisa's behavior when her mother returns, what psychologists call the reunion, that they are particularly interested in.
Most importantly is to look for the type of balance that a child strikes between an attachment need and, on the other hand, to explore the play material.
Once Lisa has settled down to play, a stranger enters the room and sits in the chair reading a magazine.
Lisa, where's the bowl? Where's the bowl?
After a couple of minutes, the stranger attempts to interact with Lisa. Soon after, Lisbeth gets a cue to leave the room. The stranger tries to comfort Lisa, but in vain. Lisbeth comes back into the room, and the camera records how Lisa reacts. Now the first part of the procedure is over, and Lisbeth settles Lisa down again. The stranger leaves them alone together. And soon after, Lisbeth goes too. Lisa is on her own. Her distress is plain to see. Once again, the efforts of the stranger to console Lisa are to no avail. But Lisbeth manages to calm her almost at once, and shortly afterwards the observation ends. Lisa showed outward signs of what's called secure attachment. Can these signs give us an idea of what's going on inside the child's mind? John Bowlby used the idea of an internal working model to describe this. Howard Steele, another attachment researcher, explains what this means.
Some people express the internal working model in the following terms, that the child who behaves securely, if you like, in the strain situation, has a model of the parent as available and loving, and a complementary model of the self as worthy of that love.
When data from a number of strange situations are coded and analyzed, secure attachments are usually found in about 60% of the cases.
Seem to be quite nice.
Another child, 1-year-old Eva, clearly behaves differently from Lisa during the first part of the procedure, after she's been left alone for a short time.
She's first glancing at the mother, then glancing again at the mother. You would expect now that she would seek proximity, a little bit distracted by the stranger. This takes a long time before she's oriented the mother again, isn't it?
Although she looks, but only shortly.
She's clearly distressed, so you would think that she would seek proximity, but she's just...
She remains playing with the ball.
Yeah. So more or less focused on play material, not letting her emotions go and seek proximity to the mother, get a reassurance.
Coding and classifying behavior in the strange situation is not always straightforward. Eva behaved differently in this second reunion to how she'd done in the first.
For play material, so I was stuck with a little bit of...
Some of her reactions show signs of what Ainsworth describes as insecure avoidant attachment.
On the other hand, fuzzy.
How are avoidant attachments represented in the internal working model?
This is a mother who has communicated to his or her child, if you're distressed, try to keep grips on it. Try to have a stiff upper lip. Try to pull yourself together. Try to be independent. Try to learn to deal with it on your own.
Although the strange situation is used extensively in attachment research, some other psychologists who have studied children's relationships have reservations.
I think the problem is making inferences about the relationship from how children behave in the strange situation, because it is exactly that, a strange situation. Because the tricky thing is, what does the situation mean to the child? It means something probably very different for a child who's been in daycare since early in the first year, and the same is true for children from different cultures, for whom this experience may have very different meaning again.
Despite such criticisms, this 20-minute strange situation procedure is still widely used and believed to indicate the relationship between the child and, in this case, the mother. It is considered to highlight important qualities of the attachment and show significant links with other aspects of the child's experience and behavior.
The child's representation of his or her relationship with mother from the first year of life carries over to the child's behavior with peers at 2, 3, 4 years of age, such that children who look securely attached in the strange situation to mother at 1 year are getting on better with peers in the preschool, able to work cooperatively on tasks, resolve dilemmas, conflicts that emerge, often without resorting to the teacher.
John Bowlby's initial work pointed to the long-term effects of early attachment patterns. There's now renewed interest in the impact that one generation's attachment experiences may have upon the next. Researchers at University College London collected a wide range of information on a sample of pregnant mothers and related it to the attachment patterns observed a year later when they took part in the strange situation with their children.
To our surprise, we found that the most significant predictor of the child's behavior with mother in the strange situation was mother's response to questions put to her about her own childhood relationship experiences with her parents, and most importantly, her thinking and feeling about those childhood relationships in the present.
The questions put to mothers about their childhood were part of the adult attachment interview, a device also used by the researchers in Leiden. Mothers are asked to choose 5 adjectives which best describe their relationship with each parent during their childhood.
Warm.
Their answers, together with others about relationships, lead to a categorization of their state of mind with respect to attachment. There's a strong link between these categorizations and the behavior of their children in the strange situation. In one study, 80% of mothers classed as secure had infants who showed secure attachments. Over 70% of the insecure infants had insecure mothers. So could it be possible to intervene in mother-child relationships to make attachments more secure, and so to break the cycle? Femi Yuffa is one of the Leiden research team. She's visiting a volunteer parent to try out a new approach.
Hello.
First of all, Femi makes a video of the mother playing spontaneously with the child in the family living room. Then together they watch a recording that they made a few days earlier, and Femi points out what she feels are important features of the interactions.
This type of intervention is aimed at the sensitive responsiveness of the mother. Well, you know, the definition of sensitive responsiveness is the ability to react to the signals of your baby. Most mothers react very strongly to it. They say, well, I didn't know I'm acting so interfering, or I didn't know I do this and do that.
What the researchers are trying to work on here is the existing attitude to attachment that's influencing the mother's behavior towards her child. Can they intervene to change the internal working models and so break the cycles of insecure attachments?
It's really necessary to show that if you change one aspect of the connection, one link in the whole connection between sensitivity, attachment, mental representations, that the other links are changing in the expected direction. And then causality is being established. So that's a result important for basic theory, because the training in being sensitive in the first year of life might not generalize to the type of behavior that is being requested in toddlerhood, in a later stage of the child's development. Only when the change is rooted in the personality of the mother figure, I guess she is able to adapt to new stages in the child's development, to new requirements, to new needs and emotions in the child.
It will be several years before the detailed results of this work come through, although preliminary indications are looking promising. The Leiden research is looking at attachments in the home setting. but for many children their experience is far wider. Bangor, North Wales. The daycare centre at University College. Here, in the purpose-built observation nursery, Edward Mellish researches into the effects of daycare on attachment.
In one study I was involved in, a longitudinal study over the first 6 years of life, we looked at separation anxiety in 18-month-old children. Now, separation anxiety is one index of attachment in early childhood. And what we found was that the likelihood of the children showing high levels of separation anxiety from the mother was related to the quality of care that that child received in its main caregiving environment. Attachment patterns in children are related to their experience of communication in their caregiving environment. Where that caregiving environment is such that there are high levels of communication, responsiveness, and affection in a consistent way, those children will show secure patterns of attachment, where we know the quality of care is almost universally high. Where they do find any differences of daycare versus non-daycare children, almost always those differences are positive. Usually there are no differences, but if there are any differences, they tend to be in favour of the daycare children versus the home-reared children.
Research done elsewhere in Europe and America supports Mellish's findings. It's roughly 50 years since John Bowlby opened up the world of attachment. The field is still widely researched and highly controversial. Does the strange situation really tap the quality of a child's attachment? Can a child's experience in other settings make them less stressed when separated from their mother, and so make them appear less strongly attached? Is one good attachment within the family necessarily better than a variety of carers? These are important questions, for if we have a better understanding of attachments and their effects, we could open the way to building a more caring society.
The consequences for society are quite profound. The research evidence is such that attachment in early childhood does seem to have long-term implications for later development of children and lead to differences in the personality characteristics of adolescents and presumably later adults, which have consequences for the nature of the society in which we live. So, if we know that there are particular environmental circumstances which affect the nature of the attachment patterns that children show, and we know that there are certain attachment patterns we would prefer children to show, we should be altering the environments of children to optimize their development.
I need some help. Hey, I've got the steering wheel.